Rhitama, are you there? If you are there, I will pass immediately to your presentation. So yes, I see you. Rhitama Basak is going to speak to deconstructing gaze, the self and the other in women's travel writing to and from colonial Europe. Rhitama, I can see you, so it's the floor is to you. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Rhitama, can you hear us? And can you share the presentation or I can upload?
I guess I can share it. Let me know if it's visible.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Okay. Now we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So I will be talking about a certain possibility of dialogue or contestation or subversion through women's writing in Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment period. And I'll also be offering a certain trans-regional perspective to the discussion. My paper is titled Deconstructing the Gaze, the Self and Other in Women's Travel Writing to and from colonial Europe, as I will be dealing with two different texts and I'll try to locate these texts written by European British woman writer and an Indian woman writer who travel to the land of their respective quote unquote other. Uh, Before I get into the texts, I would like to trace the dominant discursive paradigm within which these texts can be located. So if we look at 17th century, 18th century, and even early 19th century Europe, as Edward Said would point out in Orientalism, we will see a certain imaging of the idea of the other, Europe's other, the non-Christian, non-European, colonial other, to both sides. And there are certain images about the other that is often created. If you look at this painting, which is a very famous painting, and this painting, we see a certain depiction of the quote unquote exotic Orient with the Turkish bath, with the nudity and the nakedness of the Oriental other, and everything that is not European. If you look at the Saidian discourse, we understand the othering of the Orient or the creating or constructing of the idea of the Orient as the non-Europe or everything that is non-European. So on a basis of negation, and there's also moments of construction, moments of addition to that idea. Getting back to the topic, keeping that in mind, we are trying to, being aware of the dominant, we are trying to locate spaces of possible subversions and contestations through women's writing. Dealing with the idea of the colonial self and the colonial other, the colonized self and the colonized other through the two texts that I'm going to talk about. So here's the other painting that I wanted to show before I get into the discussion. There's also a gendered perspective, as we know, that is associated with the construct of the Orient, the hypersexualized femininity through which, as Malvi would talk about the male gaze, if we can use the term, the Occidental male gaze is looking at the Oriental woman, a certain kind of nudity which is hypersexualized to an extent. So we have all that as the dominant element of the time. Given that, we are now going to look at the two texts by women writers, and we are going to explore how the women writers are dealing with the dominant, where there has been a reception of the dominant, or whether there has been contestations in looking and talking about the other. And it is I'm going to look at it through a gendered lens, as this Orient-Occident narrative has gendered layers to it, mostly constructed by male authors, male painters, the male gaze is very, very prominent. And here I would like to mention that this is also true uh, for the Indian colonial middle class or upper middle class intelligentsia, which is also creating, not countering at all points. I would not say that it is countering colonialism at all points, but it is in sort of trying to arrive at terms with the colonial rule in India. And these are English speaking gentlemen who are presenting themselves as Indian men. This is also, again, a very much male dominated discourse. So, on both the sides, we have male dominated discourses that mark the dominant of this period, both for England and India. Given these contexts and the text that I will be talking about, the first has already been discussed in this session. That is Lady Mary Wortley Montagu's The Turkish Embassy Letter. This is a series of epistolary writings, which was also edited later, and it was published posthumously after. So Lady Mary accompanied her husband to this long journey. It was an official administrative visit for her husband, and she was accompanying him, and she traveled across Europe, and she reaches Turkey. Now, Turkey is at the margin of Europe's idea of selfhood. Turkey is the space where the other begins. So it's just towards the east of Europe. So it is the space where it is a space inhabited by Europe's other, as Said would call it. On the other hand, the other text that I'm going to talk about is Krishna Bhavini Das's The Bengali Lady in England. She's writing in Bengali, and Bengal, I would like to mention, was the center of England's imperial rule in India. And she is from Calcutta, which was the center of the British rule in India, of the British Raj, as it is said. So Krishna Bhavini Das is traveling from Calcutta to London, which is again the center of the British Empire in Europe. So there is a trans-regional interaction that is happening in both the travel accounts of these women writers. Now, what I would like to locate over here is the autobiographical mode, crucial to first-person accounts and crucial to travel writing. So there is a truth claim involved in travel writing, and for women writers, this truth claim often emerges as an agency claim, because there's this entire gender domain of acceptance and submission in a male-dominated discursive field. So in order to create a discourse or even to state experiential narratives, women authors, when they talk about the I in their narrative, there's also an inherent agency claim, I would like to believe, as language, if we quote Linda Anderson, is a phallocentric institution. So when the non-masculine, feminine, female I is speaking, is there a place for subversion, is a question that can be asked in the process. There have also been debates, this is just an example, there have also been debates about the post-structuralist idea of the dead author. The idea that the author is dead and you need to look at the text and you do not need to, the text is as important as who, could have written it. This is contested by feminist critiques, saying that this is probably true for white male writers, but for women writers who have always been subjugated, be it Black women writers, be it South Asian women writers, who have always been subjugated, who has always been invisibilized, this approach or this perspective, this theoretical domain might further invisibilize them. So keeping that entire trajectory of theoretical and discursive debate on the topic of the autobiographical I, and trying to locate the text within this paradigm that has been created since post-Enlightenment till now, in order to understand the autobiographical narratives. So within that entire trajectory of writing in the first person narrative and the contestation that women's writing might put forth, I would like to locate these two texts. I would like to quote Anderson, who says that autobiographical writing is constructed the subject through strict narrative and linguistic convention. This convention is by definition male dominated, and now she suggests that whether women's writing can actually put forth an alternative space, a place from which she says to contest their socially sanctioned position of silence and submission. So this is what this is basically to sum up what I have been trying to talk about in terms of the context when women writers are writing in first person narrative. Now, I would like to draw your attention to this particular slide, which is just a pictorial representation of what I'm trying to understand as the dominant idea of the Oriental femininity within the Orientalist discourse in Europe, in Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment Europe. So we talk about we often get to see the discussions around the hypersexuality, the nakedness. Now I would like to draw your attention to this particular slide. Lady Mary, this is an episode that I have picked up from the epistolary writings of Lady Mary. So Lady Mary talks about the Hamam and the Harem. The Hamam and the Harem, the Hammam is the Turkish bath, and the harem is the interior space of a building, of a house, an apartment, where women of the community or women of the house reside. Now, there have been sexualized idea, overtly sexualized idea about the Hammam and the harem of the non-European, non-white, non-Christian other, and the women have been doubly otherized in this narrative, which has been much discussed. I would like to draw your attention to the way Lady Mary looks at the Hammam, and she clearly says that her male contemporaries who did not have access to the Hammam, because Hammam is a space which can only be accessed by women and not men. So who did not have access to the Hammam could not have possibly given the correct representation of the space. So she is providing a critical lens. It is a very self-reflexive narrative coming out of colonial England. So as Linda Anderson had claimed that women's writing can offer alternative space, alternative discourses, we see that alternative space to an extent of subversion in Lady Mary's account. And Lady Mary says that there was nothing quote unquote immodest about it, and they walked and moved with grace. Now something interesting happens. Lady Mary compares the women of the Turkish Hammam to Mother Mary, and then she draws from the Greco-Roman references. Now, what is happening over here? There can be critique of whiteness because Lady Mary says that they are as white as we are, and whiteness is being used as a matter of likeness between the two communities, between the races. However, what also has to be noted, that is my take, that here whiteness is not about discrimination, but here whiteness is about the common cultural register that Lady Mary comes up with. So not just whiteness, but also the Greco-Roman references, the reference to biblical references in order to describe the women of the quote-unquote other community, is drawing from cultural registers, which is a register that is available to Lady Mary, and that is also palatable to her British and European readership. And she talks about this hammam as a cultural cafe. So far from being a overtly sexualized space as seen by the male gaze, the Turkish bath appears as a cultural cafe, a place where there's discussion, where there's debate among the women. And she also continuously she draws on the fact that the male authors and the male painters would not know because they cannot possibly have access to the Hammam. This is another episode. I'm not going to read this out. I hope it's visible. In this episode, she talks about difference. So there, she had talked about likelihood. She has talked about likeness in terms of their appearance, their discussion, their intellectual capacity of the women in the Hammam. Here, she talks about difference. She says that her attire is different from what they were wearing, and in spite of that, she has been greeted with grace. Now she says she's again being self-reflexive, and she says that in our courts, that is in the European courts, when there is something that is different, it is further otherized, it is further marginalized. So here is a great degree of self-reflexivity that is being presented through the writing of a woman writer, given the dominant narrative stating absolutely otherwise. Now I would like to come to the text by Krishna Bhavini Das, who's from Calcutta and India, traveling again, accompanying her husband to England. It has to be noted that she belongs to the Gentlemen's Society or the Bhadra Lok Samaj of Bengal, which is, as I had mentioned briefly earlier, is the upper middle class, English knowing, male dominated arena of the society, and which is also very, very caste divided, because along with class there is the caste issue that is prominent. And here it is also a patriarchal, male dominated society, so women might be learning, or might be learning skills or languages, and might be educated, but they mostly constituted the domestic realm of the society. So given that situation, being that the dominant idea of society, Krishna Bhavini Das accompanies her husband to England, London, and now there's a possibility of what is known as the empire writing back. And in her narrative, we see that possibility becoming fruitful as she offers an equally nuanced, as we discussed in Lady Mary's work, an equally nuanced and equally critical narrative of her encounter with the English other. She's not rejecting everything, so it is not coming from an ultra-nationalist perspective, rejecting everything of the colonizer, of the colonial master, and she's also not accepting things completely without the critical eye. So we see that critical eye in both these women writers. Here also we have the I writing. I would like to quote this part. She says that here I have penned down both the good and the bad aspects of the British people. And she says, I quote, I have tried to present an unbiased account of their lifestyle. This unbiased account that she's trying to present is also an agency claim, as I would like to look at it, along with truth claim. As a woman writer, she is claiming that this is unbiased, so this can be believed. And she is also, like Lady Mary, using common cultural register, which is available to her and to her Bengali Indian readership. She talks about the bridal veil of the Christian wedding, and she compares that with the cheli or the choli, which is also a piece of cloth used in South Asian weddings. She talks about the engagement using the Bengali verbal economy, and she is also comparing the family structure, but not rejecting any of the social norm that she's being exposed to. She's not rejecting it completely. Having said that, she has a very strong critical eye that she offers, being a woman writer from Bengal, which is a colonized space. She offers, just as Lady Mary had offered the criticality, and she had critiqued the supremacy, the British supremacist behavior towards the colonial other. Similarly, similarly, Krishna Bhavini Das, K. Das, belonging from the colonized India, has the eye to critique British imperialism in very simple language. She says that, I quote, uh, just as vultures hover around the place where they can smell meat, British rush to any place where there is the slightest chance of earning money. And she says that there's no guilt in this imperial practice. So, in very simple words, she's critiquing British imperialism. So, if you
You have you have to finish.
okay, so if we wrap it up, then what we see is a certain criticality that is involving the idea of the colonial other in both the narratives. And we see that in both these authors, we see how power and authorship can be viewed through a gendered lens with the possibility of subversion by creating an alternative cognitive space. Uh, and also an effective paradigm. So it's women who are forming, contesting, and communicating Enlightenment modernities or alternate ideas of Enlightenment modernities. So that is my paper, and I would like to thank you all. Thank you.